Hey everyone, Great Awake Coach back again. Thanks for the likes, follows, and shares over on BitChute, Gab, Odyssey, Rumble, Telegram, YouTube, and the freshly updated GreatAwakening.net. I appreciate it all, just so you know. So today we're going to talk about an important concept to understand if you want to make it out of this great awakening process with your head and heart intact. You ready? The reality you have been living in was created by psychopaths. Take a moment and think about that. I'll say it again because it's that important. The reality that you and I have existed in all our lives was invented by psychopaths in high society and big business. They are old families, old money, old power, and they are both dangerous and insane. They believe themselves to be the direct descendants of Cain from the biblical story of Cain and Abel. Cain, if you remember, was the very first murderer. These people believe that because of their bloodlines, their supposed lineage, that they have the right to rule over us, to poison our food and water, to spray us from above like bugs. In short, we are fighting a 6,000-year-old death cult, folks. And they don't like you. They call you names like breeders and useless eaters. If you haven't figured it out quite yet, nothing would make these monsters more happy than killing 90% of us, just like the Georgia Guidestones suggest they do. These human monsters set up this matrix, this simulation of manipulation that we call reality, strictly for the purposes of enriching themselves and furthering their control over humanity. The day-to-day operations of the reality are then managed by the psychopath's minions, who seem to fall into 4 different categories: fellow psychopaths, just further down the ladder; sociopaths, greedy, soulless, and/or unethical human beings; and/or the average person who just needs a job to pay the bills, blissfully unaware that the people at the very top are lunatics. This whole concept of reality being run by a bloodthirsty, old rich cult is not new. It would, however, explain a great deal about why the world is the way it is. What? You think good, moral people run the world? They don't. If decent people ran the world, we wouldn't have tax, vax, child porn, constant war, deaths from despair, drug gangs, famine, homeless vets, human trafficking, infinite debt, leukemia, or Lil Nas X. If nothing about this reality makes any sense to you, it's probably because you're not a psychopath. I say probably, because after all, true psychopaths are actually pretty rare, making up only 1% of the population. Geez, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? What do they say about the 1% of the population controlling 80% of the global money supply? You think that might be the same 1% that are psychopaths? Never mind. That said, there is a greater chance of you being a sociopath, as they make up roughly 7 to 10% of the general population. So, after factoring in 11% for those 2 crazy-ass groups, we should probably add career criminals, central bankers, drug dealers, false prophets, Fortune 500 CEOs, mass shooters, the mentally deranged, shills, trolls, spooks, and career politicians, rich old oligarchs, people who actually worship Lucifer. All in total, we're talking about roughly between 15 and 25% of the population, causing nearly 100% of the trouble and misery on this planet. The world isn't supposed to be this way. You know that, right? This place could be heaven on earth in comparison to what it is now. But somehow, we've allowed the worst people amongst us to consolidate all the power, wealth, and influence. We are living through what history scholars would call a kakistocracy, which is a combination of two Greek words, kakistos and kratos, with a literal meaning of government by the worst people. However, if you look at this nightmare of an existence that we call reality from their perspective, this is exactly the way the world is supposed to be. Dark, shitty, and cruel. You live in a psychopath's version of reality. And because you've lived your entire life in it, you just think it's normal. Speaking for many who have already awakened, I assure you that this is not normal. The psychopaths run the world theory would explain a great deal about why we're lied to, about things like natural cures for lifelong diseases like cancer, addiction, and mental illness. It would explain why they put fluoride, a known neurotoxin, into your drinking water. It would also explain why they allow international bunker fuel ships to create 14 million new cases of childhood asthma per year, and why they blame us for climate change, while they totally admit controlling the weather using a long-standing field of study called geoengineering. If you still don't believe that they can control and steer the weather, please have a look at the website weathermodificationhistory.com/interactive-timeline, and you'll quickly find out the idea to control the weather has been around since the 1840s. Let's just say they've come a very long way in 180 years. I'll put the link in the notes section below this video. Look, it might also be important to remember that their plans for this new world order has literally taken these crazy people hundreds of years. And that's why almost no one notices them or tries to stop them. Their plans are generational. They don't care if it takes 300 years for their plans to work out, which is insane in and of itself. So here's the point of all this. Our inability to see the enemy right in front of us, our collective reluctance and or inability to acknowledge, identify, and deal with these monsters is a massive problem that I call the Clarice Starling effect. A loving tribute to the main character from the 1991 Oscar-winning film The Silence of the Lambs. In the film, actress Jodie Foster plays a young, inexperienced FBI agent in training who finds herself in the middle of a big serial killer case. She begins an uncomfortably honest dialogue with the most notorious serial killer in captivity, a forensic psychiatrist named Dr. Hannibal Lecter, played by multiple Oscar-winning actor Sir Anthony Hopkins in what might be considered a career-defining role. He and Clarice quickly come to an agreement. In exchange for his assistance in catching this new killer, Clarice allows the twisted doctor into her head. Through these dark quid pro quo therapy sessions, Clarice learns how to think like a serial killer. As it turns out, that was the reason she hadn't caught this new killer. She hadn't been thinking like a psychopath. How are you supposed to stop evil if you won't even acknowledge that it exists, let alone learn how it behaves? I believe that this is a rather appropriate metaphor for where we find ourselves in the summer of 2021. Until now, we have been unwilling or unable to identify and understand our enemies. This has been to our great detriment. That time is over. We must arm ourselves with at least a rudimentary knowledge of what a psychopath is, how they act, and how to spot one. Here's a quick overview. A psychopathic personality is a combination of emotional, behavioral, and interpersonal traits according to the Society for the Study of Psychopathy. The common traits of a psychopath are lack of guilt and empathy, lack of close emotional bonds with others, narcissism, superficial charm, dishonesty, manipulativeness, and reckless risk-taking. Those all sound like qualifications for being a Fortune 500 CEO or a career politician, don't they? Do an internet search on why do psychopaths do so well in business, and you'll be blown away by what you discover. Which is that I'm right. People with psychopathic tendencies tend to end up in high places of power and influence. This infographic gives us a glimpse into the professions that attract the most psychopaths. So, on the high end, we have CEOs, lawyers, media personalities, salespeople, and surgeons. And on the other end of that spectrum, the careers that tend to not attract so many psychopaths are all caregiven, are all compassionate jobs like care aides, nurses, therapists, craftspeople, beauticians, and stylists. Makes perfect sense. You know, I wonder if they included politicians in that survey. You know, one more infographic, if I may, and this one focuses on Ted Bundy, a famous serial killer from the 1980s. It lists off some interesting traits that Ted had. Ted Bundy, convicted serial killer, was happy, charming, congenial, articulate, popular, confident, intelligent, a college graduate, an honor student. He worked for a suicide hotline. He was a volunteer, a social activist. The man saved a toddler from drowning and wrote a rape prevention pamphlet. All of that is super fascinating, especially considering Mr. Bundy confessed to 30 homicides committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. That's 30 women, by the way. I've been asked by a viewer to include the web address and phone number for RAIN.org, the nation's largest anti-sexual violence group. If you need help or someone to talk to, please call 1-800-656-4673, or you can chat online with someone at online.rain.org. There is no need to suffer in silence. Finally executed in 1989, Theodore Bundy was the perfect example of a psychopath. A charming, charismatic, and good-looking monster. Psychopaths aren't born. They're made, often through trauma or neglect at a very young age. That doesn't mean we should feel badly for them, though. The same ultra-rich, inbred psychopaths that have been running things for 300 years are responsible for every war, every famine, every modern plague, every government overthrow, every tidal wave of street narcotics, and every illegitimate lockdown. And trust me when I say that they don't feel bad for you. This is why things are so crazy right now. This control they've had over us is slipping. Their masks are coming off, and a process has begun that cannot be stopped. There's good news in all of this, though. There are far more of us good people than there are of them. So why aren't we acting like it? If roughly 20% of the population is trying to kill the other 80% of us, we need to stand up and address this rather dire situation. So how do you deal with a psychopath? What do you do with an enemy that cannot be dissuaded or deterred? Do you think you can reason with them? You can't. These monsters will not stop, ever, until we stop them. In the next 24 to 36 months, you and I are going to have to make some difficult decisions and some real easy choices. I'll give you one right now. Do you want to be free? Or do you want to continue to be a slave in a psychopath's version of reality? Tick-tock, Clarice. Tick-tock. Welcome to the next great awakening of mankind. And for those of you who stuck around till the very end, here's a psychopath joke for you. God bless you guys. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon.